We'll be starting in 5 minutes. Hello. We are going to start in 5 minutes. We're going to wait a couple minutes for some people to enter. In the meantime, if you click on the bottom 2 lines, you can see where it says broadcast to the world. You can kind of send an email and send a text to other people and they can hear us. I'm sending it right now to Twitter and Facebook. We're live on LinkedIn right now. So everyone that's on LinkedIn that's listening to us, hi. And we are also live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitch. Hi, Will. How are you? Great. All right, we'll be starting in 2 minutes. I'm doing great, Will. Thank you. And you guys can share this with your followers as well. If you click the 2 little lines to the bottom, you will see where it says broadcast to the world. You can share this to your followers. You can send it an email. You can send it to family. It is a really great platform here on Fireside that we're able to do all that, where people, if they're not in the app, they can still listen in, which is really, really helpful to get people's stories out. And that's what we are all here to do on Fireside. So let me mute Mr. Waitbot. So welcome to YNS Live. I am so, you guys know I say it every time, but I truly am excited to get other people's stories out. You know that. So I want to welcome you to Nikolai Tilshman. Did I say that right? No, Tishman. Right? Did I say that right, Nikolai?
Cool to be here, Juliet. It's slightly different. It's Tillish.
Tillish.
But
and no man.
Had to, yeah, exactly. I am a man, but we even had to add an S for people to be able to pronounce it where I live now.
Right. So, and the funny thing is, anyone that's listening, they know that I'm dyslexic. And so my pronunciations of people's names always throws me, but I have said your name like 30 times and I don't know why. And I kept saying every once in a while, if I wasn't looking at the piece of paper, I would say, put a man on the end. And I'm like, don't do that. And I just freaking did that. But fun fact, Nikolai is dyslexic as well. So that's one of the things, when we first spoke, what kind of connected us, which I love. So I'm going to do a little reading. Our sponsor is Picked Cherries. Anyone that does not know about this app, you guys have to go check it out. You can get it on iOS. You can also get it on Android to a podcast. And there's that little moment that you love that you want to share, but you send the whole podcast, right? There, you send the whole podcast. Sometimes they're an hour and you say, go to minute 2, or go to minute 25.3. And you send that to your friend and they never do. You send it to family and they never do. Well, now you can with an app called Picked Cherries. You can actually be listening. It's a podcast listener. You can listen to your favorite podcast on there and you can find that little moment that you want to send, just like an IG or a TikTok, and you can send it to your friends and family so they can listen to that little snippet. And then usually what has been happening with my podcast, they listen to that little snippet and then they go listen to the whole thing. So you guys have to check out Picked Cherries. But I am really excited again for this episode for so many reasons. When Nikolai first met on LinkedIn, my guest, my listeners always love to know kind of where I meet people because I meet such a broad range of people with so many really interesting stories. And Nikolai is an international leadership coach, but he is also an author, and Return on Ambition has won some awards. It's the IBPA Benjamin Franklin Award, which is really exciting. So we connected and he was telling me about his book. And I said, I want to know a little bit more about you. What is your story? And that's where the dyslexia came in. And he's like, I'm an author that's dyslexic. Like, I have a story. So welcome, Nikolai, to YNS Live on Fireside.
Thanks so much, Juliet. Yeah, it's something we share, and I have struggled with names and still do, even to the extent I have a couple of clients or companies where I've been very politely been told several times that I mispronounce their names. But
Right.
They keep inviting me back, so apparently it's not the criteria.
Well, because you have so many other gifts that, as we know, with dyslexia, that's like a little thing. And if people can get past it and see our greatness and what we can do with our dyslexia, with our, the way we think out of the box and our big, picture thinking, they can get over it. So I know when we originally spoke and, you were telling me, because you guys had just written this book, which is so exciting, and we're going to dive all into that. But can you give us a little background about you, where you kind of grew up, a little bit of history of who you are and kind of what has shaped you?
Yeah, yes, of course. So I'm Danish. My name don't reveal it, but I'm one of the most Danish persons you'll probably ever meet. And to tell you a story, my father was dyslexic, and I think my grandfather was also, so in the paternal line. And so for me, growing up, that was like quite natural that I was a little bit against letters. I mean, a little bit like it's a matter of belief, and I don't believe in it. Though I was quite good at math, and I think it was in third grade, I really had an existential crisis because suddenly we got math exercises with text in, and I had no idea what it was about. So I really had kind of to make a choice in life. Do I want to kind of compromise on the thing about not wanting to read, because I really struggled. It didn't come natural. And you have probably guessed I chose then to really put an effort in, and it was really tough. And it was funny because later when I met my teachers, they was like, "What are you doing? Are you at university now?" And again later I got, when you graduate, then one, I think, of the most preferred employers is McKinsey, the management consultancy, and that was where I got my first job. And people were like in shock. I mean, how is this feasible? I'd say it's pretty tough to be a management consultant and dyslexia, because it also implied I had to sit up late often to really make sure to make these horrible typos that. I mean, you're very exposed when you make presentations for very senior people who are very busy. I mean, it really needs to be their bullseye. And then in particular, some of the mistypos you can do are really funny. So I had to work extra hard.
But you know what I love, and I know, and thank you for sharing that, because I know when we first spoke, one of the things that I loved that you said, that I said, you know what, I think I need to have you on my podcast, is you created relationships, and that's where you excelled. The relationships that you made along the way. And then when you got into the job at a very high level. So can you explain to us what those relationships mean to you and how you kind of figured that out? What age you figured out that, okay, I might struggle in school, but you know what? This is a gift of mine.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think I figured it out very late, and actually it took me a long time to understand, because clearly I learn differently than most people do. So the majority of people sit down with a manual and read it, or buy a book and read it. And I haven't, in particularly in my younger life, I didn't read so much. Today I read quite a lot. But I happen to know a lot of things. And even in school, I mean, in some of the courses, I got really, really high grades without opening the books because I just knew what it was about because I was watching a lot of telly and I was always curious when I met people. So it's a little bit. I mean, your weakness can become your strengths, but also when you have weaknesses or whatever you call it, or when you're different, you use your other strengths to compensate. So, but still to this day, I have this. I sometimes know the answers to things, and I have no idea how I know it, which is actually quite uncomfortable. So I'm very good at coming up with hypotheses. For instance, if you, I mean, you do that occasionally when in management consulting, you come up with hypotheses. I'm really good at it. I still don't understand why. I'm
Right.
chit chatting with people, and I know. I mean, kind of put me somewhere, and I'll like get to know everybody quite quickly. I mean, and it's always been like that.
Well, and that's one of our gifts. And I have to say, which I'm really happy, my dad is in the audience, who is dyslexic as well. And that's where I got it from. And you know that my older son has it as well. And
Yeah.
I always am fascinating with the degrees of dyslexia, right? So some people have strengths where others don't. So like my son and I would say my dad as well, they're like really knowledgeable. As you said, like my dad knows so much. Like if I ever have a question that's like, I will go to my dad. Hey, and he always like it's always sometimes I'm like, how do you even know that? And he's like, I don't know. Like the same as you just said. And I think my older son is going to be like that. He always knows facts because he's really curious, but he also listen when he hears something, it sticks. I didn't have that. I'm very curious, but I wasn't as strong when someone would say it. I would kind of need to see it written or I would need to write it myself where my son doesn't need to do that. That actually will throw him off. And so I'm always fascinated with the level of dyslexia and how people compensate and how they kind of figure it out. One of the things that my son is really, really strong at, and it always like, I'm like, you're going to be so fine in life, but he always finds the person to help him. And he knows how to, and I don't want to say manipulate because that's like, I feel like that's a negative word, but he knows how to get what he needs from his teachers. And so he's always like, yeah, mom, no. And I mean, sometimes I'm like, he's like, yeah, I got her to do it because I just said I couldn't do it when he was younger. And I'd be like, oh, well, honey, well, you need to learn. And then I'd be like, you know what, do you really need to know earth science? And we are not strong in math, my son and myself. And so it was always like, you know, there's certain things that we have our strengths, as you said, and our strengths are so important, but our weaknesses to me are just as important to be aware of them and then figure out how you can work around them, whether it's people that can, you know, support you on your weaknesses, or you have to figure out yourself, okay, how do I get around this? I know this is something that is really tough for me. I know I can figure it out, but then it's also the time thing. So when you were saying when you were in management consulting, when you had to put that time in, was there ever a period where you had the assistance because you're like, you know what, this is going to take too much of my time. And now I'm at a level where time is money, right? I need my sleep. I need to be good. How can you take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think back then I didn't share that I was dyslexic. I think I used it during one of my interviews to get in because somebody kept probing me like, can you come with an example of you've had a challenge where kind of was very difficult? And I was like, I'm dyslexic. And I made it to your interview. And he was like, wow.
Right.
But he probably forgot it. So I kept it as a secret. And I think there I had to fit into a system, which was, of course, we got a lot of support, but because we often worked at very odd times and many of my clients were in the US and in different time zones, then often it was not really feasible to get help at like really awkward times. But later on, and I've been part of starting a couple of companies, when I set my own support system up, I've been able to optimize it. So
Right.
I use there are various solutions now available publicly, but I get proofreading, so I have a really good service for that. There's also an algorithm service when you write. I use that a lot, and sometimes I dictate and then I get transcripts just to cut a corner when I need to write something quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But those are the things that I feel like nowadays, and correct me if I'm wrong, but nowadays there's so many more like things to help, right? Like I know when my dad was younger, there was nothing, and it wasn't really even dyslexia wasn't really, a word probably. It was like you just are not good in school. You're just not. And his brother was really good in school. His brother went to Harvard and Yale, and I know I'm getting those, but he went, he's an attorney. And so it was one of those things that it was like, okay, well, these are your strengths, but you're not good in school. And so it probably was constantly like, you're good at this, you're good at that. And nowadays, I remember when Montgomery was, my oldest was diagnosed, I went to my dad and I'm like, all right, tell me the things now that really help you. I'm really curious on those things that really help you because I know what helped me in school, but I'm not in school anymore. And I know that you've worked, now have had so much, growth in your life because you're older, the experiences. We can all kind of talk about our stories and our experiences and how we learn from those. But so it was, and he'd be like, okay, this dictation really worked for me well, but this one didn't. But when when my son was younger and he was in school and we were learning about that, I was staying home with the kids. So I wasn't using these tools, but my dad was in the workforce. So he was using them. So it really helped me to be able to tap into him and say, okay, tell me the shit ones and tell me which ones work. And it was a really great collaboration and great to have someone that understood. I think that's one of the things that is so important for us to feel understood. Like, when you have a teacher that's like, oh, just try harder. And you're like, I can't try harder to spell asshole. I mean, excuse my language, but
that's actually, I mean, this is the funny thing. Dyslexia is so difficult to spell.
Oh, it's torture. It really is. And my children's names are Montgomery, Truman, and Penelope. And I have to still, when I spell their names, I have to say it out loud as I spell. I mean, I think my mom was like,
I misspell my own name, but that is like, then I'm very tired. So,
right.
But it's beautiful. I think also because now you share a couple of stories from your family, and I think I've come across so many people who thought very different than others. Some of them has dyslexia or have dyslexia, some don't. But there's really a beauty that people, despite being different, now get better chances than before. And I would actually say that it took me a long time to realize that several of the people I really like listening to have ADHD.
Oh, we have that too.
But suddenly it was like, wow. Because they're like upbeat and like a lot of things is happening and they connect things. And I mean, it's difficult to stereotype or in that way categorize. But I just actually noticed that a lot of the people I really enjoy kind of listening to and sharing ideas with have an energy level that is very different than other people.
Right. And so that is, and I love that you pointed that out. It is nowadays in society, it is talked about more, but I still think in public school here, especially in the US, we're still so far behind. I know we have tools and stuff, but there's so many teachers that still don't get it. And it's really frustrating, especially having a son going through it. It's like, okay, constantly, we need to work on his weaknesses. Well, how about his two strengths that are really, really good? I mean, he's really good in English and he's really good in history. Why are we constantly harping on the science and the math? He's not going to be a scientist and he's not going to be a mathematician. So let's just kind of work on the strengths, and they still don't get it. And I understand that you have to get past those classes. And again, that's part of it. I'm like, why? Like, why do we need to take earth science still in this day and age if that's not going to be a focus? What are your thoughts on that?
I attended a dinner party and I shared my view on the school systems of today. And even though my kids have always been very lucky in terms of which schools they got into and how dedicated teachers they had, I think that's really important to have dedicated teachers. So we've been very lucky in many ways. But still, I'm really concerned because the competition to get, you mentioned Harvard. I mean, the competition to get into Harvard now is so brutal. I mean, when I was young, I mean, if you knew about Harvard, then you had an advantage because most people didn't. Now, I mean, you have people all over the world that will
all over the world
give an arm to get into Harvard, and that also means that what determines who gets in become more and more marginal. So I'm really concerned that it's a little bit like it become a system where people work harder and harder and optimize the way they work to get through these like kind of test, and in particular the American school system use a lot of multiple choice, which I'm very concerned about, because it's a different way of learning. I mean, it's a very narrow way of learning, and there's a lot that is important that is not captured through those tests. So I was just ventilating my kind of my skepticism towards the school system. And one of our really, really good friends, she said to me, Nikolai, if that's your attitude, I don't think your kids will get a good job. And it just occurred to me, and I said out loud that I would actually be really happy, because I think if the problem repeats itself in a lot of big corporations, I'd love to see my kids being artists or entrepreneurs.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
and I think actually, and this is the funny thing, that it's about 10% of the adult population in the Western world that has, you estimate, has dyslexia. And when you look at it in corporate jobs, it's only about 3% of managers who have dyslexia. So that means it's a significant underrepresentation of dyslexic people. But when you look at among entrepreneurs, there's an estimate that 30% of entrepreneurs have dyslexia. So,
Oh,
so there you
wow.
have a little bit like a space where creativity is needed. One of the things so I read about this study, and one of the kind of perspectives was that people with dyslexia they're forced to make their own path. They cannot expect to be competitive in the traditional path, so they are forced to make their own path. And also, and I recall this from school, we get used to, in a very young age, to delegate, because when there's too much text, we are dependent on somebody else to read it for us.
Right. And I love that you said that, because that was one thing the teachers early on would say to my son, like, say to us, well, he always gets the group and he'll tell everyone else what to do. And half of the time they're doing all his work, but he's like, and then I'll present it. But those are the life skills that's what we need. And that's where it's so frustrating. Proper education it's really not teaching you. It hasn't evolved since basically what my dad and we have been in school. And that's what's so crazy to me. I'm like, okay, you have more things, more support. Yes. So I'm going to throw that out there. There is more support than when we were in school. However, it's still that narrow mind. And that narrow mind is not a dyslexic mind. I actually was speaking to someone that's going to be a guest on my podcast, and she is really into the right and left brain, and how we don't really highlight. Is it the right brain that we don't really highlight? Is that the creative side of the brain? Whatever is the creative side, there's not enough of it, and not enough is tapped into and appreciated with that creative brain, and how important that creative brain is to have in the world.
Yeah, it's again, back to my concern about the school system. I think a lot of the exams are about whether you make mistakes. Either directly or indirectly. That it's about to do things flawlessly. While I think when you look at super creative people, they actually do a lot of mistakes. Mistakes is a part of the whole creative process. And again, I've had great luck in my professional life to work with really outstanding people. So it's in no way a criticism of anybody, but occasionally I'm still also surprised about how little imagination well-educated people have.
Right. It's true though. It really is true. So that I would love to now. You and I could talk about this literally,
Exactly.
forever.
We
I
have
do
our
want to
little,
ask you
like, we
before
are
we get
actually
into
not
the
so
next.
weird.
Right. Well, and that was one thing when we did. The thing that I loved is when we connected, it was really cool because you were telling me about this and that. And I was like, that's a really interesting part, but I want to know more about you. I want to know more about who you are. And that's what, where we're really connected. So do any of your children have dyslexia?
We don't think so. And actually, I kept it a little bit as a secret for them, because I wanted them to be diagnosed if they had the diagnosis. So we have a suspicion that our daughter, who's 13, potentially have a little bit, but she have been tested and it's not strong. They also, we have two children, so 11 and 13, and both of them are perfect bilinguists. So their first language is English because we've lived abroad. So they have lived
Right.
in the first, yeah. And I mean, they've only been in Denmark for the last 2 years. So now they have to learn a new language in terms of writing and reading, which they have done, but not as much as you would do as a native. So they struggle a little. So no, I don't think they have it, but I also, we spent time talking with the teachers about there was a high probability of it and how it would materialize. I have a niece who is dyslexic, and I'm her great hero because she's very proud that you can actually write books even though you you have dyslexia.
Well, that's the thing. And I love that that's what you did. And I feel like that is, though, such a common thing with us with dyslexia. When you fail so many times growing up, you're not nervous to tackle things. And that's, very prevalent with your whole career. You jumped into things. And I think that's one of the things that people that don't struggle, that really just kind of live life on that straight path, they don't take those, they don't go out and explore. They don't go out and take risks. And I think that's sad. Like that's one of the things I love about my dyslexia is that, and I never really thought about it until I really started creating this podcast and it really started growing and my story started growing. But, people said, when you started your podcast, like what made you want to do that? And I said, well, I love stories. I wanted a platform. Oh, can you hear my dog? Oh my gosh. So it was like a very,
to the story.
Oh my gosh, my microphone really picked that up. Usually we don't. I have this new microphone. So sorry about that. But so it was a really, surprising thing is, you know what, I'm going to have you continue because I'm going to let this is like insane.
Tell a story.
Yeah, tell us a story, please. Hold on one second. I'm going to turn my mute up. But tell us a little bit about where your career went, from, where you went out and really took those jumps and those leaps to be like, you know what, I want this in my life. So if you share that a little bit, I'm going to let my dog out of my room.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when you ask, because when you look at it from the outside, you can see that I suffered from dyslexia. I was also at university. I was part of contributing significantly to 2 books, and then later have been, that was in Danish actually, and then later have been writing 2 books in my capacity as a leadership coach, which I've done for the last decade, a little bit more actually. But I finished my exams in economics, went to McKinsey for some years, got a couple of promotions and all this stuff, did quite well, but always wanted to start my own business. And then I have in 3 rounds been a very, you can say, central person in starting a business for a big international corporations. So I actually think all 3 of them are Fortune 500. They must be. And then afterwards I've been starting 2 businesses of my own. So from the outside, you would never ever guess that I'm dyslexic. And I also think it's something I to some extent have been overcoming, though again, when I'm tired, and occasionally I work very hard and I get very tired, then I can feel that talking with people is much more natural than reading and writing. But otherwise it works reasonably. Juliet, are you there?
Are you guys out there? Can you hear me? Oh, I think we lost Nikolai.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we lost you for a second.
Okay, but you can hear me again?
Yep, I'm going to put you on video. Hold on one second. There we. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah,
there you are.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, so I don't know what happened. I feel like the world right now, there's a lot of like internet stuff going on. But so what you were saying is, which I loved, you were talking about your leadership and in the jobs that you got, and that you really, you didn't talk about your dyslexia, and it really never came up, and you worked really hard. And I think the one thing that is so important that people don't realize is when you are dyslexic and you use your brain and you work really, really hard, it exhausts you to an extent. So, like, people will say to me, I'm so tired. Like, how can you talk and like do interviews all day long and not get tired? Because that's effortless for me. That does not take anything away from me because that is one of my really good skills. But if I had to sit and read something, I'd fall asleep in probably 20 minutes because that is using a part of my brain that I have to work really hard on. So I would love for you to touch on that because you've now said that like twice. And I know with my son, when he went to a dyslexic school, the difference of how tired he was when he came home versus when he comes home from public school. Cause half of the time I'm like, he's taking in what he needs, but he's not working on the really hard stuff because they're not, they don't know how to do it. But touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say that I have learned to work so hard that it's become a part of my personality for good and for bad.
Right.
And in the book that I wrote with another guy also called Nikolai, I mean, we talk about frenemies, which are basically the virtues of ambitious people, but that these virtues often turn into, I mean, they're not only your best friends, but they're also your worst enemies. And one of these is perseverance. And I'd say I'm really kind of a living example of that. And that means that it's not until I became a father, which was relatively late, that I really started confronting myself with it. So I really had this extra drive. I've been working tremendously hard, and that of course have been an advantage. But it became habitual. So it's like I tended to overcommit. I tended to, if person said this is impossible, I was like, yeah, I'll disprove you.
Right. Nothing's
Yeah, but the
impossible.
same. Yeah, no, exactly. So this attitude, which of course occasionally professionally have been such an advantage because, I mean, people said you can try this, but we don't think it would work out. And I mean, I came back and kind of it worked out. And I've done this over and over again. But it's also, I think it becomes so it's beautiful to have this ability, but it's also a liability because it means I could see it with my I mean our children that to be fully present father, I mean that I cannot sit and work like 20 hours a day, which I've done in long periods of time. It's just,
Right.
you can just not combine.
Now, because I mean, I feel like that's something that we all strive to have, that work-life balance. And when people always say that, I'm like, I mean, you do your best, right? I know my kids, when I'm doing work, when it's usually like a family time or whatever, I'll say to them, listen, if you guys really need me, or this is really annoying me because I'm usually multitasking and doing something, um, just say, Mom, I need you. You need to focus on me, and then we'll be good. Don't resent that I'm doing this work because I'm building something that's really special. And the way I work is like you, if I'm turning it off, it really never gets turned off. Like my husband's really good at being like, okay, I'm working, I'm not working. For me, it's always kind of like if I get an email or something pops up, I have to do it right then because if I don't, it's going to stay on my mind or I completely forget about it. So I need to kind of do it there. So I think that is, the whole work life balance is really not a farce because I don't want to say that, but it's really something that we all kind of strive for. But I think within each family, it's how it works best for each family. So how have you kind of, now that you have kids that are, 11 and 13 and, how have you kind of balanced that?
It's funny because we also write a bit about it in the book, but I'm very honest that I'm really not an expert in the sense. I mean, I'm often violating it. I mean, I'm often incapable of keeping that balance. So I think it's really difficult, and I think also I might kind of self-legitimize, but I think actually that the kids also experience that occasionally I'm busy. So I've just had 3 weeks where I was in Portugal with one client, and then I was in Italy with another client, and then I was in Cyprus with a third client, and then I came home and I had like a lot of calls because it's been quite intense. So I needed to catch up with some of the clients I work with on a more regular basis. So that was kind of a crunch time, and I think we talk a lot about now. I've had a period that was extra intense, and I think that's important. And when that is said, I think I like the way you talk about it as a family thing, because it's really also how you are as a family. I mean, my wife also works, but we talk a lot about how we can do in a way where things work out. So, for instance, we have had a rule that we could not at the same time travel abroad.
Right.
And also because we lived abroad. So if you live abroad and both are traveling and you have two kids who are home, but in a place that is abroad, it starts becoming, I mean, and also we lived in a part of the world where I'd say we lived in Dubai. It's very close to Iran. So
Right.
I mean, to suddenly if something happened and had two kids there, not being there would be horrible. So I mean, sorry that was a little bit off track, but my point here is, I think the balance is, of course, the easy thing is to try to do as little as possible. But if you try to live a very rich and exciting life, it is something where you also need to be open to the fact that it's not perfect all the time. But on the other hand, I guess the kids' life would have periods where they're also deeply engaged, and they are very active, and they have a lot of friends, and we have arranged ourselves. Yeah, it's a long answer. It's not as clean and clinical as it could be. So occasionally it's messy, but I love my life, and I love my work, and there's plenty of both, and there's also a lot of time for the kids.
Which I love. I mean, and I think, again, as I said, like, it's important to have that open communication. Like, as I said, I've said to the kids, like, listen, I'm growing something. I didn't anticipated it to go where it is, and I'm loving it. And so I really want to, continue it, but it doesn't mean that you're now left behind. You guys are the most important, little 3 people in my life. If you need me, I will drop everything, whether I have a live show or what it is. And they know that. So I feel like if they know that, it's like, okay, let mom's happy. This is great. She's doing something she loves. And I think it's really important. My kids also see that I'm just not sitting around, and that's okay if that's okay for someone, but I have ambitions. I stayed home. I left a career to raise them, to be home, because that was important to me. And that's what I wanted to do. And that worked for our family. And now that they're older, they don't need me in the same way, but I need to continue to grow. I don't want to just stay there and be stagnant, because for me, being bored or being like restless is like the worst thing in the world. I need to be doing, and they know that. So, I think that your answer was beautiful. It's like you guys have rules. Okay, we both can't be out of the country, and the kids know that. That, okay, mom and dad, so they know that you're talking about it, right? I mean, you're open with it. This is what we're not doing. This is what we're doing. I think is really important. Yeah.
And I think you say something that is really important, is that, I mean, I can sense your energy from our conversations, and I think it's very inspiring, and I think that Ida and I, to our kids, will also be inspiring in the way that they can see that, I mean, none of us have a job we hate or dislike. I mean, there can be times where it's like, I hate sending invoices, but we keep doing it.
Right.
I find it incredibly boring, but that they grow up with parents who lives active lives, both professionally and socially, and in that way, I mean, they don't need to live in the same way, but at least it's not, we try to kind of slow things down to find a balance, but that we have a balance with a lot of plates spinning at the same time.
Which I think, as you said, is important, because I think that's one of the reasons why I started the whole podcast. And then it, as I said, it kind of blew up to something else, but it was really talking to people that was like, I want you guys not to be miserable in your life. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter where you live. Like, you can make changes. You're not a tree. You don't need to stay where you are. And if you're miserable in your job, what does that say? What does that say to your kids? What does that say to your family? But also, what does that say to you? We have one life. You might as well try to do the best that you can in exploring something that's going to make you happy. You want to be, waking up. And, I've talked about this many times in the podcast. I don't wake up every day and be like, woohoo, that's, I get grumpy. I get tired. But for the most part, I'm excited to wake up, to see who I'm talking to, have a conversation like we're having, learning about what you're doing, because that's the thing. We can all learn from each other. We all have stories that we can learn from each other. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, what your education is, what your position is in life. We can all learn from each other and, I think, inspire each other. So I love what you're doing. And I would love now for you to talk a little bit more about the book and how that kind of came about. You and Nikolai and Nikolai. How did you guys decide we're going to write a book? Was that you? Was that him? Give us a little background on that.
It's clearly his fault. So I'd written a very practical book about leadership in difficult context, and he happened to be my client, he was with McKinsey, so the same company as I had worked in earlier. So I did some work with them, and he was one of my core contact persons. So he came and said, "Should we write a book?" And I found it interesting for many reasons, and we started writing it. It would be, where my first book was very practical, this should be a book about the big questions in leadership. And I came back to him and said, "This is too big. This is simply too ambitious." And we had a long conversation.
Wow, you did, huh?
Yeah. No, but it was really, it was. So one of the trends in leadership over the last about, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 years have been that it's important to define what is the meaning in life. And it's almost like leadership and the way you build organizations have become kind of a substitute for faith and life philosophies. So when you ask the big questions in leadership, it becomes really existential, like what is the meaning of life? Kind of. and why it's easy.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Oh God, that's actually very, very kind of well placed in this context, because you get into that whole religious thing also. And then we talked about it, and we talked about our ambition, and then bang, nobody have written about ambition. If you look at it, if you type ambition into Amazon, there are very few books that pops up, and it's interesting because this is ultimately what drives much in the world. That's people's aspirations, their ambitions, and I think one of the reasons is that when you look at the research around ambition, it's actually showing how dangerous it is to be ambitious. When you look at the psychology research, so when you are very ambitious, you are more likely to develop workaholism, depression, stress, burnout, etc., etc. Yeah, there's one of these longitude studies that showed that ambitious people seem to actually be living longer, but that's one of the few, and it's really like a byproduct of the bigger study. It's not focused on ambition. So suddenly we also realized that because we have worked with incredibly ambitious people, and I would say it's a common denominator for all my clients. I tend to attract people who are very, very ambitious. And you can say a lot of people struggle in their leadership is actually their own ambition, because they identify with this like future version of themselves that is even more successful than they already are. And that also means they become very fragile, because they often kind of feel that they're not doing well enough, things are not going fast enough, etc. So we wrote a dedicated book about ambition. And the title Return on Ambition comes from actually a very scary thing we found out, because we asked a lot of people. So we did an international survey of ambitious people, and the people who like self-declared as ambitious, 43% of them admitted that they occasionally were in doubt about whether all their ambitious efforts would pay off. See, this is really significant. It's almost half that doubt whether it's worth it. So that motivated. We talked about like, how do you get a proper return on your ambition? So it might be by working less, but achieving the same, or it might be by putting in a similar effort as today, but then become much more successful. So that's what the book is really about.
I love it. And you know what you said? I mean, and you know, it's an old cliche, but likes attract likes. When you said you have a lot of clients that are ambitious, I mean, when we first opened up the show, you talked about, you know, you're an ambitious person. So
Yeah.
I think it is really fascinating, and working with people that you kind of have, you know, obviously you learn about people, you know, but in life we come across people that, you know, you right away click with. And then there's the people that you don't. And it always fascinates me, the people that it's like uncomfortable when you're having a conversation with them and you're like, I don't understand why they don't seem to understand me. And it's just like it's like an energy thing or a weird vibe. But when you work with people that have that same sort of ambition, same sort of spunk, same sort of, you know, it's some sort of energy. You know, I have a lot of energy. Obviously, we've talked about that, and so not everyone has my energy. I see Katie Brinkley in the audience there. She has that. But so it is really an interesting thing. So as you dove into this book, what were some of the others? And I love that you kind of pointed out that percentage. And I think that percentage is something in life. I mean, when we all tackle something, you know, it's a 50-50 chance if it's going to work out or if it's not going to work out. And a lot of times for me, you know, I believe in God, and I really do believe that we all have a path. And I talk about on this podcast a lot about the fact that we should daydream. You should find that space to daydream, whether some people call it meditating. I call it daydream. I know that I can't just sit on a mat and clear my head and and do that, because then I think of the laundry and all the things that I haven't done around the house. But if I'm walking, if I'm moving, is when I get my best creative, thoughts, or that's when I can really daydream the best. And so that's when I came up with the podcast. That's when I come up, if I've talked to guests, like, okay, how do I see this coming about? So when you were writing the book and really kind of diving into it, what were some of the things that, other than the percentage that stood out, what were some of the other things that you were like, wow, I need to get this book out, but I also am really fascinated about this as well?
I think there are a couple of candidates. So one was, we saw that the people who are really successful over time, so continuously successful, not just one hit wonders, that both through our survey, but also through in-depth interview, and also we went through related research and more or less everything we could find. And there seemed to be that people who are really successful over time, they nurture their personal growth and learning. You talked about learning.
Mm-hmm.
And also they are very cautious about their well-being, and well-being more than just like physical health, mental health, social life, spiritual life. And I think that's important. And it's also, you referred to work-life balance earlier. I mean, it's such a funny notion because it sounds like work is not part of life. I mean, but when you look at these three at the same time and say you need to nurture all three, and if you make a compromise on one of them, then the two others will go down over time. We saw that again and again, and there's a lot of research showing it, that each of these three, achievement, growth, and well-being, they are closely interrelated and self-enforcing, or destabilizing for each other if you don't nurture them. So that was one. And the other thing I would say is that when you really spend time thinking about your own ambition, and you do so when you write a book about ambition, it also suddenly becomes an object you can hold up and start looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's been such a significant part of my identity that people say, do you know Nikolai, he's so successful and he's done this and he's that. Because I was 29 years old when I was appointed managing director for a pretty hot company. And so it was like that whole identity around the success was I mean, I couldn't separate it from myself. And now, maybe because of age, it became easier, but also, and that's one of the things we give the readers in the book, time to really reflect on what's your ambition, and also this thing with frenemies, that there are a lot of things that have become such an integrated part of yourself, you don't notice it anymore. But sometimes
Right.
it's actually making life much more difficult for you. It becomes much more difficult to achieve what you would like to achieve, and it becomes really difficult to nurture these and I can see. I mean, I've had periods of time where I gained like 50 pounds, and that's quite a lot. I'm quite tall, but still not so tall that you don't notice it.
It doesn't hide.
Yeah, exactly. And I've had long periods of time where I barely slept, which is super unhealthy. But it's funny because at that time, I mean, I was very successful and I had a very rich social life, so I didn't see any other alternative than just kind of be out there. But of course, it's not been healthy. So the more you can take these things up and not being subject to them, but take them up and look at them in more as an object, you can also choose like what is really the most important thing here. What is less important? What don't you need to do as fast?
Yeah, and so I love that you talked about that because I know for me when I was younger, I could literally 5 hours was good, and I could live on 5 hours of sleep a night. Like it didn't bother me, and I remember the kind of the period where all of a sudden I realized, oh crap, I kind of like sleeping now. I can't wait to go to sleep.
Exactly.
And I also know that if I don't get a good night's sleep, my podcast interviews are not the same because my brain is not as clear. And it's so many different things that sometimes it's frustrating because I'm like, oh, I loved in that day where I could party all night, I could sleep for 4 hours, I could wake up and I was, still crisp and, I could still do things. And then that time where it was like, okay, I mean, kids, you also learn in there, adrenaline for so many years when they weren't sleeping, you weren't sleeping. But then as you get older, it's the same with nutrition, it's sleep. And it's so interesting that those kind of things are more top of mind where when we're younger and we're working really hard and things are coming, and your body's not breaking down. But I feel like as you get older, you become more aware of it. Is that something, do you agree with that? Or is it something that do you think physically it's harder? So do you think it's more of a mind or body?
I think it's both. I mean, without doubt, the body restitute less well. I mean, when as you age, but I think, and there's some pretty solid research about it. Our ability to remember our feelings is pretty poor. That means when we look back in life at periods of time where we have been sleeping very little, worked very hard, we have a very poor recollection of this ongoing noise level, this ongoing kind of unpleasance. I mean, we don't remember it. We typically remember the peaks of experiences.
Right.
And I can see it now when I occasionally work with leaders who have been moving up very quickly and therefore are relatively young and sit in the kind of positions that I typically work with as a coach. And it's funny because they probably believe that they can sleep so little and nobody noticed. But when I sit with them, it's like
You notice.
it's like I can barely keep your attention for more than a few seconds at a time. I mean, um, um, yeah, I would say I can see in some people how this belief that they don't need to sleep that affect their leadership, and it's their struggles to be fully present and to listen to other people. That and it's not uncommon in corporate environments when you get at a very high level that people are like very switched on and things goes very fast. But when you actually sit in and observe, part of my job is to sit and observe leadership teams. In between, we do like active work with them. But so I observe a lot of teams, and it's quite interesting. You put these incredibly well-paid people who are super intelligent and really hardworking into a room, and often what happens in there is pretty dysfunctional because people don't pick up clues from each other. They can sit
Right.
and have a debate where you. Sometimes I'm asked if I can give feedback after having observed, and sometimes I really need to weigh my words very carefully because it's like the quality of the discussion don't reflect the intelligence in the room.
I love how you just said that. And I can totally picture it and I think anyone in the audience can picture that wherever anyone's listening, because again, sleep is so important. And there's an irritability when someone's not getting enough sleep. And you could see that in so many different levels, from a child to, a midlife person, to a young person, to an older person. And a lot of times in certain circles, sleep is not talked about as, it's like you just do it because you have to, but it's not like an essential thing. Like, so it always fascinated me with like surgeons and like, how do they actually do that? I know their body gets used to it because they have like a different sleep cycle, but still, I never think that that's like a good thing. I'm like, it's sleep is so, I know, so important for me as I've gotten older, for my brain when I'm having a conversation. As you said, when I'm sitting here and listening, if I'm tired, I'm more distracted.
Yeah, and I know in the US when you're an intern, so when you have finished your studies and start working in the hospitals, it's not unusual to work 110 hours a week.
Yeah.
And it's really odd. So of course this is a very critical phase for people professionally, because this is where they make their name, and if you become like an acknowledged doctor in the US, you can really make a lot of money. So I can also understand why people really have an incentive to give themselves fully. But without doubt, I mean, this hurt most people's precision and their productivity. So it's one of these things where I can fully understand why each individual work like that, because so much is at stake for them.
Right.
But when you look at it, it's really not optimal from a hospital's point of view. That's my strong view.
No, totally. And also having a surgeon, like you think about it, like I want a well-rested surgeon. I don't want someone that's been, and I know the surgeons, when they get to that level, they're not working those crazy hours. It's more specific. But like when as you said, with the interns, you kind of are like, oh, interesting, because you know what. And as you become more, older, you're more aware of things. I mean, that's just, even when your parents were, when you were younger, oh, I just know because I'm older. I mean, still my kids get so frustrated. Well, how do you know? I'm like, because I've lived. Like, I've lived life. I know these things. It's annoying. Trust me.
I'm ahead of you.
Right. And that's exactly what it is. I mean, it really is. So, Nikolai, I would love for you so do you think there's going to be more books? I mean, that fascinates me. I mean, again, when we talked, it was, you're like, I'm dyslexic and I wrote a book. And I know there's other dyslexics out there that maybe wouldn't even ever think about it because words are hard. But you did it very successfully. I mean, you've won awards for it. Do you think there's more books, or was that like a, you know what, I did it and I love that I did it, but I'm not going to do anymore?
No, I think I will write at least one more book. I have an idea. I actually had it already when Nikolai approached me, which is
Oh, I
several
love
years
that.
ago now. So that book needs to get out at some point. But it is really a love-hate relationship, that thing. And I know the same also for non-dyslexic authors, that when you sit down with this completely clean piece of paper, or of course you do it in a computer in most cases, but still you start out in a document that is clean. That's such a beautiful thing. I
Right.
mean, and then when you're through the third editing round with a really ambitious publisher, it's hell. It's so bad.
Right. So that's so fascinating. So what did you find the most difficult part of the writing?
I think we had a really good partnership, Nikolai and myself, when we wrote it. So we wrote parts of the book together, and he wrote one part, I wrote another part. So I think in many ways that worked really well, and we were very lucky. We had 3 editors in various rounds that were also really helpful. One part that was really tough, and I was actually with him here a few days ago, we gave each other so blunt feedback that it was really emotionally tough.
Right.
And I think the book would never have become as good as it became had we not been so, I mean, brutally honest to each other.
Right.
Um,
And that's
so
communication.
I think that part of it is tough when you write with somebody else. And I think the same goes also if you were, I mean, a lot of dyslexic people, I have an impression when they write books, they work with ghostwriters. We didn't. Another is that so much is written about leadership. Now, our book is about ambition, so it's a bit broader. But I've really been fighting with myself about, are we putting something down here just because it sounds cool? It will actually make a difference. Is this? I mean, is it out there already?
Right.
That whole uncertainty of actually having ideas that are clear and valuable and unique and are presented in a way where people get them easily, and it's also done in a practical way. That's brutal.
Right. I mean, it really is. I mean, just the process. I've talked to, other writers, and just the process to me seems overwhelming. So I have to ask this too, because I know for me, what I have that I want to say, if I am going to write what I'm going to say, it never comes out the same way. Like that's where my dyslexia is. Like I have to verbalize everything. I need to voice notes because it doesn't. And like if my friend is texting me and has like a long question, I'm like, oh, I got to voice text you. And now there's a lot of people in my life that don't love my voice text, my
Oh
husband
yeah,
being one of them. But I'm like, honey, if you're going to ask me a question, I'm not typing it. I can voice, voice note where it's picking up my words instead of just my voice. But half of the time I have to go through it and I don't know, like there's always so many mistakes. So did you put pen to paper? Like what was in your brain, you put it on paper, or did you voice that into an app that then transcribed it for you?
No, I mean the book was written, but I was laughing when you were telling about it, because I also have a lot of friends that writes me this kind of text message saying, "Thank you so much for your podcast. I'll listen to it if I get time," because
Right.
it's so much easier. And sometimes I feel it's also so much more personal. And I spend a lot of time even on text messages or emails to get them right. So people tell I'm very good at it, but I also spend more time than most to be precise. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think when you leave a voicemail, you say things once, and in the broad scheme of things, you say it right, and you, I mean, it works really well for me. But then again, this is for one person. When you write something that thousands of people will read, and millions have access to in eternity, then suddenly there is some, at least for me, that I really want to get it right. And that also means that it's a very iterative writing process. That there's one chapter in the book that I mean, it could have been a whole book in itself. And I think I've spent, I don't know, 3 weeks on that chapter. I think it's a
Wow.
really good chapter now.
Well, I'm sure it is. I mean, but that's what I love. I mean, the thing is, and again, I don't think people appreciate, because not all dyslexic people, as we talked about in the beginning, there are certain things, we have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, and not everyone's, just because you're dyslexic doesn't mean that it's an umbrella, right? So there's different ways, there's different spectrums of it. And I love that you, from an early age, you knew that you were going to put like if you put tons of effort into it, you would have the outcome that you would want. So there's a little bit of a perfectionism in you that I'm hearing. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, oh, without doubt. I would say that there are, as I understand, about 5 different categories of dyslexia, at least according to one of the models. And one of those is the phonetic kind of ability to pick up a sound and connect it with a letter. And that's where my weakness is. So when I
Okay.
write today, the way I write is literally, I know how the word will look in letters.
Right.
But if somebody says a name, and I've worked a lot, I mean, around the world, including places where people are not called the same as where I grew up,
Right.
I have no idea how. I mean, even guessing the first 3 letters is typically for me kind of quite a challenge if I haven't seen it in writing.
Right. But I mean, just the whole pronouncing someone else's name from a different country. I share this when I first went into the business world, I was an assistant. And so I had to answer the phones and, write the person's name down and give my boss the note, like this person called. Well, I would get off the phone and I'd be like, oh crap, I don't know how to spell their name. And so he
Yeah,
literally, I said to him, I was like, listen, I don't want to be an assistant. I know this is a stepping stool. I suck at this. Like, this is not my strength at all. And I'm trying. I'm really trying. Thank goodness I had a boss that, would joke and be like, all right. Like sometimes I'd just pick up the phone. I'm like, can you just get it? Because he said the name, but I can't pronounce it again. Like I can't say it.
But and then people are generally very nice. So then they spell their name, but most people, they have spelled their name so many times, it goes so fast. Again, after 4 or 5 letters, I'm like lost. And it's really, and other people would not believe that this is true, but that's how it is.
Right. Especially because where you are in your business. I mean, you have climbed, in the whole cliche, every ladder and have gotten to the top in many, aspects. You've written a book, you've helped so many people and so many organizations with their leadership to make other leaders better. But communicating and connecting with people.
Yeah.
And you can feel that here.
Yeah. But and now we talk a little bit about learning in life, and as I've been climbing that ladder, my confidence have also been growing that I must be doing some of the things okay.
Right.
But still, sometimes it's done in ways where I realize I do it very differently than other people. I mean,
Right.
back to the thing about how on earth do I know this and how do I know that? And yeah, but that's because I pick up signals from many places where other people would typically go to one source and then they would repeat the source. But because I didn't grow up like that, I typically have a very multifaceted perspective on things.
Which has been successful for you. But the other thing is, and I touched on this a little bit, I believe in God. Some people believe in the universe. I actually believe in both, but you are in what, God created you for exactly what you're doing. And it shows, when we find that what God has created for us and we are in that path, that flow, no, it's not always easy, but you feel the flow and you're like, okay. And every time it's like, okay, am I in the right spot? And then something happens, that's so cool to feel that and be connected with people and then be like, okay, I keep doing it. I'm out there daydreaming. And then this just came to fruition and this just came from fruition. And I just met these people here. And it's such a cool thing to be in that path. And you clearly are in that path. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm typically using slightly different words, but I think the sum of it I clearly experience, and I think when you see yourself as lucky and when you look at setbacks or weaknesses as opportunities, then you're in a pretty good position because of course I'm super privileged in many ways. I mean,
but you've worked really hard for it though.
Yeah. But again, from the outside, for a lot of people, I mean, I'm kind of, I've been grown up with loving parents, and I mean, been lucky with a lot of things. But yes.
But as you said, I mean, you work harder than probably the average person to be where you are because of dyslexia and because you have you hold yourself at a certain level, which is which is great, but that's why you are successful. So I loved this conversation. I said to you, when we met and we talked, and at first it was like, well, we could talk about the book, and then when you started talking a little bit more, I was like, oh my God, I'm fascinated by you because of all the things that you have done and in the world, raising a family, having your wife, and just I'm excited to continue to watch you grow and learn from you. I mean, really.
No, thank you so much. And also say, I mean, as I said, I'm lucky. I really enjoyed this whole thing. So thank you for all your energy and enthusiasm. It's really been a joy to prepare and also be here on the call.
Yes, thank you. And guys, you can find Nikolai. His website is here, but he also hangs out on LinkedIn, and that is his name. If you're driving and you're like, I can't see it, we're going to spell it, and I'm going to spell it. Correct me if I'm
Slowly, if anybody.
Yeah, right. So it's Nikolai, Nicolai, and then Tillish. I said that right this time, right? Tillisch. And that's .com. You can find him there. You can email, they can find all your information on your website. Correct, Nikolai?
I mean, I think I have offered quite a lot of information. I mean, given how interesting I am, I think I've given enough.
I love that, right? This is good. Well, you are on holiday, so I also appreciate you because we've had this.
It's not a big holiday. It's a public holiday in Denmark. It's fine.
Yeah, but still, you got to spend some time with the kids. And I know we had switched a couple of times because my listeners know I had 2 boys that have broken limbs, and we had to. It's been kooky over here. But as we all know, us, anyone out there that's parents, building a business, being a parent, living life, we have all these things that are thrown at us, and we just have to not ever let them take over and make an experience define us. We have to take an experience and we have to learn to live with it, embrace it, run with it, and and take life as it comes, and not, again, let it define us. So Nikolai, I thank you so much for joining YNS Live here on Fireside. Wherever you guys are listening, if you were on, I know I had a couple internet stuff. So if you were on LinkedIn and we lost you, I'm so sorry. But if you were there, if you're YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and here again on Fireside, and you guys will be able to have this episode on any of your podcast players in a couple weeks, and we will let you guys know. But Nikolai, thank you so much again, and I'm excited to be in touch with you and watch you grow, and again, as I said, learn from you. And thank you, everyone.
Likewise, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Take care.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Mark, Will, Cindy, Rachel, and Katie. And I know there's been people in and out, but for joining us here live in the show, we appreciate your time and for here, listening to Nikolai's wonderful story. And, if you're out there listening and you are dyslexic, it doesn't define you, and you can literally do anything you ever want to do. We are actually cooler than most people. Right, Nikolai?
Exactly. Normally we keep it a secret, but today it's official.
Exactly.